You know that feeling of being young and experiencing your first love? Heightened emotions, the constant need to see them, yet feeling your heart flutter when you do, that inability to go to sleep or eat, the hiding from your parents, the first touching of your hands, the first kiss, you get the picture. I know a lot of you listening will relate. There are a few experiences as universal as your first love. But what happens when your first love disappears right before your eyes and suddenly the world turns to look at you, wondering whether or not you could have done something to make them vanish? What happens when then your first love reappears, but not alive anymore, and suddenly the world turns to look at you, wondering if you could be a cold-blooded murderer? This is the story of one such young love story that captured the imagination of the whole world. This is the story of Heightened and Adnan Syed. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Adnan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that captivated not just a country but the whole world and is by many standards considered the beginning of investigative true crime podcasting.
I was about to say serial, the mecca, the creme de la creme of crime podcasts.
Begins with this case.
And this case, in fact, when we first covered it on our audio-only podcast, find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to your audio-only podcasts. Rabia Chaudhry, who was directly involved in fighting for Adnan, reached out to us. Not relating to this case, just like a Desi.
She loved the Gabbar Singh episode.
She loved the Gabbar Singh episode, which YouTube listeners will be getting anytime now. But it's one of those cases that I'm still unsure.
Yeah.
What
a lot
I
of
believe.
People are.
It is the Arushi Talwar of the West.
100%.
What happened? Why did it happen? Did it happen? And so Aishwarya, take us through that whirlwind of a story all over again. And for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, subscribe. I mean, so many of you who listen are not subscribed. I don't get it, guys. It gives us so much vanity and pleasure to see that subscriber number increase. It leads to no revenue, but just like...
But it's cute. It's fun.
Yeah, it helps you. We want the gold plaque, if that's the thing, right?
That is
we want that eventually. And I mean, each subscriber counts towards that. So please help, fan our vanity by subscribing.
Before we start the case for today, I want to give a shout out to our primary source for this episode, the HBO documentary titled The Case Against Adnan. If this episode gives you sleepless nights like it did to me, go watch the 4-part series available online. Now to begin this story, we're going back to the year 1999 to Baltimore County in the state of Maryland, the third most populated county in the US. I've been to Maryland and it's a beautiful scenic state with an incredibly diverse population. It was no different in 1999. To be specific, we're beginning this case inside the Baltimore police station on the 28th of February 1999, where the police were interrogating an 18-year-old Pakistani-American boy named Adnan Masood Syed. The problem was that Adnan didn't remember. The police kept asking him where he was for 21 minutes after school 6 weeks ago, but Adnan couldn't remember. It was just 21 minutes after all. Do you remember where you were for a random 21-minute time span on a day 6 weeks ago? I don't. But to you and I, a day 6 weeks ago was most likely a normal day. If some of you are students, you'd say you were probably in school or in one of your classes. Or maybe you were on vacation. But what exactly you were doing for those 21 minutes on your vacation, you probably wouldn't remember. But to Adnan, that day 6 weeks ago, the 13th of January 1999, was not an ordinary day. It was the day his ex-girlfriend, an 18-year-old girl named Heightened, disappeared. Make no mistake, the police weren't interrogating Adnan only because he was this now missing girl's ex-boyfriend. They had reasons to call him in. You see, a friend very close to Adnan had chosen to come forward to claim that he knew that Adnan had killed Hay. Not only that, but this witness, Adnan's friend, also claimed that he helped Adnan bury Hay's body. As of last year, Adnan was 42 years old and had spent more than half his life in prison for a murder he still claims he did not commit. So who is this witness? Who is Adnan? Who is he? And more importantly, did he do it? To answer all of those questions and more, let's go back to where this all began. In a high school in Baltimore County in the year 1998. In Baltimore County was Woodlawn High School, which was a magnet school and also where our episode's love story began. Now, magnet schools in the US are schools that attract students based on very specific criteria. The students are all academically incredibly gifted. Honor roll students, high test scorers, national test champions. That is the target group for these schools.
So mostly Asian and South Asian
100%, yeah, which is interesting. In Woodlawn High School in 1998, 18-year-old Adnan Masood Syed and 18-year-old Heyman Lee's story began. Adnan was your school's popular guy, football player, homecoming king, training as a paramedic, track runner, and good looking. That is what I noticed immediately when I first saw his pictures from the year 1998. Adnan was good looking, tall, lean, with a little bit of a mustache and hair done up like he was right out of a Pantene commercial. He was beautiful too, with long flowing hair, an athletic body, an incredible sense of fashion, and resounding confidence in front of a camera. She was a strong young woman, sure of herself. Her best friends describe her as goofy, and her teachers call her dedicated, whether it be to her academics or her love for field hockey and lacrosse. If Hay did something, she did it with her whole heart. Both of these kids were the ideal children to their very conservative parents. Or so their parents thought. You see, Adnan's parents had migrated from Pakistan and moved to the United States, where they gave birth to 3 sons, Adnan, Tanveer and Yusuf. Hay and her brother Young Lee were born in South Korea, but their mother had chosen to move them to the US to live with her parents, so Hay's grandparents. These were conservative immigrant families just trying to live simple, meaningful lives while also trying to shield their kids from becoming too Americanized. They wanted to protect their roots and culture through their children. So, what that meant was, drinking was a big no. Adnan's parents would have killed him if they found out he smoked weed. He lived in a house with nosy grandparents, overprotective uncles, and a strict mother. Going to a school dance where boys and girls danced together was wild to them. But most importantly, dating was the biggest no, especially to Adnan's parents. But realistically, has that ever stopped any 18-year-old from dating? It didn't stop Adnan and Hay either. Through seeing each other in the school hallways, attending the same classes, and sharing common friends, Adnan fell for Hay and Hay for Adnan. If you go over to Hay's personal diary, which is available online, you'll see how much she liked him. She rarely ever called him by his name, only referring to him as my baby. She described him as sweet, courteous, chivalrous, charming. Adnan had asked Hay to come to homecoming dance with him without telling his parents, and Hay was over the moon. At the dance, Adnan was crowned homecoming king with a different girl, but instead of dancing with that girl, as was customary, he came back to Hay and danced the night away with her.
I want a Hay in my life.
Really?
A hello, a Hay, anything would work.
Oh my god.
But yeah.
So girls watching this?
No.
Hello and Hay away in the comments. Give me a hello.
DM me Hay. No, but that's how she sounds adorable.
Yeah, she does. They both sound adorable together, yeah. There are pages from Hay's diary where the entire sheet is just filled with the word Adnan. And Adnan was crazy about her too. If she was ever at a sleepover with her friends, he would stop by just to kiss her goodnight. Hay's diary reads, Adnan is the sweetest guy. I love him to death. Guess what he did? He was supposed to go to his mentor right after third period. Here's what he did instead. He went out and picked up a single rose for me and gave it to me in the middle of physics. Everyone was staring. All I could do was just look surprised and just kiss him in the middle of class. All day I walked around with my rose. I can't believe he did it. It's so sweet. Now, how can I not love a guy like this? End quote. These diary entries go on, giving us an insight into a frankly adorable and new love. Both of their friends confirmed the two couldn't stay away from each other. But slowly, if you read Hay's diary, you'll notice the tone of her entries change. From gushing over the new mushy feelings of love, the complexities of their home lives clearly were starting to get in the way. Hay talks about how her grandparents replaced their home's cordless phone with a corded phone, making it hard for Hay to talk to Adnan in private. Adnan's parents showed up at his prom just to confirm whether or not he was dating someone because they were starting to get suspicious. Her diary entry from the 11th of May 1998 reads, quote, Okay, I'll make this brief because I have to do my English. I'll talk about my baby. I don't know what's going to happen with us, especially with people against us, i.e., his mother. But believe it or not, our love gets stronger and stronger every day. I keep on loving him more and more." End quote. A different diary entry from a few days later says, "Do I dare to pull him away from his religion? Miss Savik was all up in my face about it. She said things like, well, Adnan used to be so religious last year. This year, he's so loose. Like I changed him. Actually, I did, and I don't want to pull him away from who he is." End quote. It's clear their relationship was getting complicated. Their lives together were blissful and beautiful and fun, but at the end of the day, they both had to return back to strict homes, to parents they disagreed with but still did love. It was clearly hard for them. Eventually, in quintessential young couple fashion, the two broke up. Quote, "I did it. Me and Adnan are officially on a timeout. I don't know what's going to happen with us." End quote. After this timeout, though, just a month later, the two got back together again, but then broke up again. Then they got back together again. And then they broke up again.
I've never heard of that before.
Never heard of that. Who has ever done this? This is so abnormal. Yeah. He was starting to feel like she was losing herself between all the lying to her family and the all-consuming love. She says in her diary, "Where have I been the last 5 months?" This time, on this third breakup, the two ended their relationship for good. Even their friends realized that this last breakup was different. It felt more permanent, and it seemed like the two were making efforts to actually move on from each other for the first time. In fact, slowly, he actually developed feelings for someone else. By December of 1998, Hay was writing in her diary about a guy she had met at work, a man named Don Kleindist, who was 22, while Hay, as we mentioned, was 18. A little creepy, for sure. Her diary entry from the 6th of December 1998 reads, "What's the matter with me? Every time I close my eyes, I see my baby. But I keep on thinking about someone else. Don Kleindist. Why? I don't know. Why? I do like him as a co-worker, plus also maybe as a friend, but I keep wanting to get closer to him. I don't know what's the matter with me. A part of me keeps me from Don because of Adnan. A part of me keeps on thinking about Don. I'm going to have to get my thoughts straight. I do love Adnan. But today, I kept on imagining Don all over my body instead of Adnan. Don, 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 Don." End quote. Eventually, Hay and Don started dating each other, meeting outside of school, hanging out in grocery store parking lots, that kind of thing. Hay's friends found her quickly moving on from Adnan to a new guy a little suspicious. And they found Don a little suspicious too. But hey, we've all had friends make the exact same choices. Either way though, Adnan and Hay were moving on and life continued. Life continued until January 13th, 1999, just a few weeks after Hay and Don had started dating. On this day, Hay's brother Young got a call from a daycare center asking him to come pick his little cousin sister up. Young was shocked. He almost didn't know what to say about that call. He was supposed to pick their cousin up. How irresponsible of her, he might have thought in that moment. Or maybe he thought, "That's weird, I wonder where she is." Regardless of what he thought in that moment though, not for a second did it cross his mind that Hay might be in danger. Young went and picked his cousin up, and the entire family waited for Hay to return home. Her friends paged her because back then pagers were a thing, but she didn't respond. Quote, "Maybe her pager lost battery or she left it in the car," her friends thought. The Lee family waited, and when the sun had set but Hay still hadn't come home from school, the family alerted Baltimore police. The police started by doing what they always do, calling everyone close to Hay. To call those numbers, they retrieved Hay's diary, the one from which I've been reading all these excerpts. They called her friends, a bunch of whom said that they last saw her leaving school after school was over, which was at 2:15. This time, 2:15 p.m. is key, so remember it. After calling the friends, the police came across a page in Hay's diary with Dawn's name all over it. And on that page was a phone number. Assuming it to be Dawn's, the police called the number only to have Adnan pick up. Adnan, unfortunately, was high on weed when the police called. The police asked him when he last saw Hay, and he said 2:15 as well, right when school ended. But Adnan also said he was supposed to get a ride back home from Hay that day, but he got stopped at school for longer than he was supposed to, and when he got out, he noticed Hay was nowhere to be seen. He assumed she got tired of waiting for him, and so he left. Adnan asks the cops on the other line, "Is a police report going to be made?" And the cop says yes, it will. Adnan says he only asked that because he thought he would be in so much trouble with her mom because the police were now involved. Not for a second did he assume something bad had happened to her. The police ask Adnan why this number of his was in a recent diary entry in Hay's diary, and Adnan tells them that he had just bought a new phone the day before Hay disappeared and had called to give her his new number. After this call with Adnan, the police then called Dawn, but Dawn couldn't pick up. Call after call after call went unanswered, after which she finally picked up at 1:30 a.m. in the night. On this 1:30 a.m. call, Dawn tells the police he had last seen Hay the day before she disappeared. The two had hung out together and had plans to hang out together the day she disappeared too, but she never showed up. The cops asked Dawn what he had been doing that day, the day Hay disappeared. He said he was at work all day, and he had a timesheet and an alibi who saw him at work to confirm it. He said he came back from work at 7 p.m. Now, maybe this detail is striking all of you as a little weird too. He came back from work at 7 p.m. but didn't pick up the police's call until 1:30 a.m. We don't know why he did that. We don't know if the cops spoke to him about this back in 1999 or not. But we'll come back to Dawn later. So along with this 2:15 p.m. timesheet when school got over, also keep Dawn in mind. After dawn, the police were done with their basic step number 1 of the investigation, but with no idea where Hay was. That day turned into days, and Baltimore was hit with a snowstorm. The schools shut down, the roads closed, and everyone was holed up in their homes, hoping for a sign from Hay. In fact, the day that Hay went missing was the last day everyone went to school before the snowstorm. Then came around January 15th, 2 days after Hay had gone missing. It was the day of Hay's best friend's birthday. She had even noted it in her diary. Her friends say they were actually waiting for her to show up to the party. They kept hoping, peering over every new person that walked in, only to be disappointed when Hay didn't show up all night. She was so excited for this party. She had been helping her friends plan it for months. When she didn't show up that day, that's when it finally hit her friends that something might be wrong. Again, that day turned into days, and those days turned into weeks. On the 6th of February, the police organized a dog-led search across the high school, but again, nothing showed up. But little did they know, Hay was not going to show up because of their search, but because of a former flasher, a man named Alonzo Sellers. Now, a flasher, for those of you who don't know, is someone who exposes themselves, gets naked in public, and flashes their private parts to random passerbys who have no interest in seeing it. That is who Alonzo was. Alonzo had previously been charged for indecent exposure, where he stood naked in front of a woman's car. But how did Hay come to the police because of Alonzo? So on the 9th of February, slightly less than a month after Hay went missing, Alonzo was driving his car going to a school where he worked as a maintenance man. While he was driving, he said he was drinking a 22-ounce Budweiser and suddenly felt a really strong urge to pee. He noticed he was driving in an area with a forest and shrubs and trees all around him, so he stopped his car on the side and walked out to find a private spot. Quote, I had to go to the bathroom, so I pulled over and went further in the woods so no one could see me. I walked around through the bushes and everything, and I got back that way, and I was getting ready to urinate. When I looked down, I saw something that looked like hair. Something was covered by the dirt. When I looked real good again, and that's when I saw what looked like a foot, end quote. Alonzo promptly called 911, and the police discovered the body of what clearly was a young female. In the crime scene photos, you can see one of the officers on the spot holding her hand. Her skin isn't pink anymore, it's white. Like, not pale white, it looks like someone has painted over it. That's how much her body has started to decompose. In her hand, you can see 2 rings in her fingers, and her nails have turned blue. After taking the body to the coroner's office and calling Hay's family for identification, everyone's worst nightmare was confirmed. Hay was dead, and she had been dead for what seemed like a long time. An autopsy was conducted, and the reason for her death was homicide. It wasn't an accidental death in the snowstorm or whatever. She had been manually strangled, meaning someone had done it with their own hands. Not a pillow or a rope. Someone had walked up to her, attacked her, held her neck in their hands, and pressed till she was no longer alive. There were no traces of sperm in her body, indicating she had not been raped. There were no traces of drugs in her body, indicating she was conscious when she was killed. This was a cold-blooded murder, the reason for which was not making sense yet. Now, the police had to begin a different kind of investigation. Not a where could Hay be investigation or a who saw her last investigation, but a who had reasons to kill Hay investigation. And right off the bat, a few suspects immediately jumped out to the cops. First, the man who found her body, a prior history of a crime also involving a woman, and a sort of sketchy story about how he found Hay's body. The police knew they needed to question him. The second suspect was Don. He was Hay's current boyfriend, and so obviously a suspect purely because of that. He was much older than her, making their relationship a little suspicious to everyone. But other than that, he had an alibi for being at work the entire time Hay was allegedly killed. The third suspect was the most glaringly obvious one, Adnan. Up until the point that Hay's body was found, though, Adnan had not given the police any obvious reasons to be suspicious of him. Adnan was a well-liked young man, and it was clear he had cared for Hay very deeply. All of that changed, however, when the police got 2 calls in succession. The first one was an anonymous woman who told the police to look more closely at Adnan. The second one was from Adnan's friend, a man named Jay Wiles, who was 16 at the time, and so 2 years younger than both Adnan and Hay. Now, Adnan and Jay were never really best friends or even close friends, but Adnan was very close to Jay's girlfriend, Stephanie. This is how Jay and Adnan got introduced. Plus, Jay was a weed dealer and Adnan liked to smoke up. Not a lot, but often enough, and so the two became sort of friends. When Jay called the police, he told them that Adnan had killed Hay and that he had helped Adnan bury Hay's body too. Jay's story at Adnan's trial was this. Adnan called Jay at 10:45 am on the 13th of January, the day Hay disappeared, asking if he could come over. Jay says yes, and Adnan shows up at his house an hour later. At his house, both get into Adnan's car and go to Baltimore's Westview Mall, where in the mall parking lot, Adnan tells Jay he's going to kill Hay for breaking up with him. Adnan tells Jay to drop him off at school and pick him up later. Jay drops off Adnan at school and keeps his car. Then, at 3:40 pm, Adnan tells Jay to meet him at an abandoned road in the city. Adnan shows up at this abandoned road in Hay's car and shows Jay her body in the trunk. At 4:15, they drop Hay's car off at a random parking lot. Then, Jay drops Adnan off at track practice afterwards, and then at 6:45 pm, Adnan calls Jay to pick him up from practice. At 7:15 pm, after eating McDonald's and after Adnan had received a phone call from the police looking for Hay, they go to Jay's house to get a shovel and a pick and return to Hay's car and then bury Hay's body in Leakin Park.
Ash, I'm confused by something. But before I clarify that, just a quick housekeeping to get my thoughts straight. So, Adnan meets this not so good friend in a parking lot of a mall to confess that he's going to kill his ex with whom he had a seemingly amicable breakup. He does the deed, drives Hay's car to an abandoned building where he meets this friend, and the two together help bury Hay's body. Right? That's sort of the summary of what went down. Tell me, why is the friend coming forward and accepting guilt in, of course, if you're helping bury the body and you were aware of the murder, you're an accomplice. That is a textbook accomplice. Why is the accomplice coming forward when there was literally nobody pointing at him? I fully get an accomplice coming forward when there is a slight blame. So you're like, okay, I might get a short punishment. But this just seems out of nowhere. It's like the red devil on his left shoulder was like, hey, you gotta tell.
And also to me, how quickly after the crime he's come forward. So usually an accomplice, they've had let's say weeks to ponder over and they're feeling this incessant guilt. You literally just buried her body, said yes to doing it.
Because this is definitely, if there is anything that brought him out, it was guilt, because it was not getting away.
No.
Because the blame wasn't there on you to begin with.
Yeah, or maybe there was some other reason altogether.
Yeah.
So this housekeeping that Aryan just did is what Jay's testimony was. That was his timeline that he gave in Adnan's trial. But when Jay was first interviewed by the police after he had made that call to the police, his story was different.
Me, Jay, and Stephanie, we drove to Krista's together. When we left Krista's birthday party, I dropped him off and then dropped Stephanie off. So 2 days after Jay said that I killed Hay, he left me in the car alone with Stephanie.
Then in a different interview, he said that he met him at that abandoned road and then went to drop off the car at the Best Buy parking lot. Then Jay tells a publication named The Intercept that Adnan actually showed him Hay's body outside his grandmother's house. According to Jay, he didn't tell this version before as he didn't want to involve his grandmother. He initially says he saw Hay's body outside his grandma's house at 7 p.m, then later says he saw it closer to midnight. He also changed his story about where Adnan told him he killed Hay. First, he said that Adnan told him that he killed Hay at the Patapsco State Park. Another time, he says that Adnan told him he killed Hay on that abandoned street where they were supposed to meet. Initially, he said Adnan first told him he wanted to kill Hay the morning of the murder. Then in a 2014 interview with The Intercept, he said Adnan mentioned wanting to kill Hay a week before he actually killed her. The interviewer asks him, when did Adnan first talk to you about hurting Hay? He says, quote, it was at least a week before she died, when he found out she was either cheating on him or leaving him. We were in the car, we were riding, smoking. He just started opening up. It's in the evening after school. Just normal conversations, like I think she's fucking around. I'm gonna kill that bitch, man. Nothing real pointed or anything. Not like I know his name or I caught her. But I just thought he was just shooting off, like everyone else shoots off when they're mad at their girlfriend. He never said anything like, hey, what gauge gun should I use? Or how many minutes am I supposed to hold somebody under the water for? Or is there a statute of limitations on murder? I thought he was just blowing off steam and bullshitting. I thought at worst he'd throw a rock through her window or something. Normal high school, I'm mad at her and I'll scratch her car sort of stuff. I had never known anybody would have killed anybody else, so there's no way I could have known. But look, if we start speculating what he was thinking that far ahead, I don't know. He might really have just been bullshitting at the time. I don't know what happened, what occurred between them that day. I don't know if she said something he couldn't handle and went off the edge, or if he had been seriously speculating about it. I don't feel comfortable drawing conclusions like that. You can't start drawing conclusions like that. End quote.
Ash, have you seen this movie, the Queen biopic Bohemian Rhapsody? Do you remember Freddie Mercury's manager slash friend slash lover?
Sure.
And how when their relationship sours, he goes on national television to tell everything about Freddie's activities and of course flares it up and adds it, but then also acts like, oh, we were truly friends and I care for him.
Yeah.
This sounds like that. This sounds exactly like that. That like he's made up this intricate narrative of their friendship when there wasn't a friendship to begin with.
Yeah.
Like, this is how I would speak. I'm not even going to speak of my best friend so much. I'll be like, he said this. That.
Yeah.
I wouldn't weave this entire
whole story.
week-long saga of this could be that, this could be that. I'm not going to judge. This could be that. Hey, if you're my close friend, I'm judging you.
Yeah.
And I'm keeping it short and sweet.
Right. No, 100%. Aside from what Aryan said, not only was his story changing in the aftermath of his death, but also 15 years later in 2014. Despite all of these inconsistencies, however, Adnan was charged with the homicide of Heightened Lee because of Jay's story. Why? Because Jay's story was broadly confirmed by a whole host of other evidence. For example, it was confirmed by both Jay and Adnan's cell phone records. AT&T's cell phone towers placed Adnan in Leakin Park on the 13th, the day he was killed. If you don't remember, Leakin Park is where his body was found a month after she disappeared. Their phone records also prove that Adnan and Jay went to Best Buy together, that Jay dropped Adnan off at school for his practice and all of that. There were also Adnan's fingerprints inside his car, but that's not saying much considering the two were dating for months before she died. Then there was Jay's friend, a girl named Jennifer, who testified saying that Jay had told her about Adnan killing Hay and that he had seen her dead body. Then there is the last big piece of evidence, where Adnan was after school ended that day. Remember, I asked you to keep the time 2:15 p.m. in mind. That is the time school ended and people saw Hay for the last time as she walked to her car. Then Adnan had practice at 3 p.m., which his cell phone records cannot confirm because, and this is another weird detail, Adnan left his phone with Jay that entire day. According to the cell phone records I mentioned previously, Hay was dead by 2:36 p.m. This is the 21-minute window between 2:36 p.m. and 3 p.m. when Adnan had practice, for which Adnan needed an alibi.
I mean, I'll be honest. The fact that he was spending so much time with Jay, and that's confirmed by the AT&T cell tower, is does contradict the fact that they were not that good
not
friends.
That close,
because that does mean if you're spending that absurd kind of time with somebody, there is some relationship there. It might not qualify as best friends, but there is something. I have one question for you, and I'm just, putting like a brain experiment of sorts almost, because figuring out 20 minutes of a day is difficult. But, I was just, as you were narrating, I was thinking, okay, let me think of 20 minutes from last week. And I can't. It's difficult. But I think the more accurate thing is to think of 20 minutes from a memorable day. And this was definitely a memorable day because your ex died or disappeared.
But he didn't know that at the time.
Right, but you do remember. Okay, so that's why, hence the brain experiment. The day before our Apple Live performance, do you remember what you were doing?
Actually not. I'm trying to think.
Because I'm giving you an important event, but I'm giving you a day before. Because I do remember Apple event day what I was doing. See, but now as I'm backtracing it,
I cannot for the life of me remember.
I was writing
the
Nara script.
I have no idea.
But in the afternoon, what was I doing? I don't remember. I know I wrote the script and it's so impossible to place a sliver of 20 minutes. Yeah. What I did in that day, I mean, I can give you the major things, but...
Also, this wasn't an important day to Adnan. Like, the only way you're able to remember that day is you've
But why would you leave your phone in Jay's
We're getting to the
car?
story of why they were together that day.
Oh, okay.
We're getting to that story. So Adnan needed this 21-minute alibi. If Adnan had an alibi for after school ended, he could not have killed Hay. But Adnan had no alibi during trial. He didn't even himself properly remember the details of where he was for those 21 minutes 6 weeks ago on that day. And then there is a call by a friend of Adnan's named Nisha. She said she called Adnan at 3:36 p.m. It's been confirmed by cell phone records. Nisha says that when she called, she spoke to both Jay and Adnan because they were both together. Why is this a problem for Adnan? He said he was in school by 3 p.m. for track practice and wasn't with Jay at all. Whether or not Adnan was with Jay can't be confirmed using cell phone records because according to Adnan, his phone was with Jay. So if they were together, Adnan lied about being at practice and their phones were in the same location. If Adnan was telling the truth and was at practice, their phones are still together because Adnan left his phone with Jay. This story of what went down in those 21 minutes and after it is the story of the state's case against Adnan. As Adnan said himself, his case lived and died in those 21 minutes. Baltimore police arrested Adnan on February 28, 1999 and charged him with first-degree murder based on Jay's story. Adnan's family hired a defense attorney named Christina Gutierrez to represent him, but she failed. The trial began in January of 2000 and lasted 6 weeks. On February 25, 2000, the jury found Adnan guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and robbery. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Adnan's family fired Christina Gutierrez for completely botching up his case. And botch she did. Adnan spent the next 23 years in prison, more than half his life, but he clung on to his innocence. His story, lack of alibi, and frankly slightly shady behavior divided the world into for Adnan and against Adnan. I have never seen a case with such varying public opinion about who did it. But if there are things in this case that make you go, he did do it, there are just as many things that make you go, maybe he didn't do it. Now we're going to get down and dirty with the details of this case. The small discrepancies, the cell tower data, the trial testimony, the forensic analysis, and more. This is a different episode from our other ones. This one is for those of you who don't like just a good story, but also like to figure out the story for yourself by using on-ground facts. Before we get down to these details though, I want you to remember a few things. Firstly, I need you to remember to look at this case two ways. One is the way your individual mind will see it. What about the story is making you tick? Is it the cell phone tower data or Jay's changing story? Which part of all of this makes you go as an individual, that's really weird? But secondly, remember to look at this case as a jury. Is there enough evidence to convict Adnan beyond a reasonable doubt? Which means there is no reasonable piece of detail left that would make Adnan innocent. If such a detail still exists that makes you think that Adnan could be innocent, he did not deserve to be behind bars. Lastly, I want you to remember the 21 minutes that Adnan needs for an alibi. Just 21 minutes. 21 minutes between when Hay was last seen at school and when the cell phone data says she was killed. So let's get into the story now, to the most complex part of this story, the timelines. Adnan was arrested by Baltimore police on the 28th of February 1999, 6 weeks after Hay went missing, and charged him with first-degree murder based on Jay's story. Jay's story, like we mentioned, had a number of significant issues. First, there were smaller issues like him telling some people that Adnan showed him Hay's body at a Best Buy being a store like a Walmart or a Target, its parking lot, but telling others that he saw it outside a pool hall, while telling others he saw it at an abandoned road. Then there are details that are a little more weird than this one. For example, I mentioned that a birthday party happened just 2 days after Hay disappeared, where all of her friends waited for her to show up. Adnan, Jay, and Jay's girlfriend Stephanie all went to this birthday party together in Adnan's car, 2 days after Jay says he helped Adnan hide Hay's body. In fact, not only did Jay ride in Adnan's car, Jay also made Adnan drop him off at his house, leaving Adnan alone in the car with his girlfriend Stephanie. Would you leave your partner alone in a car with a man who only 2 days ago murdered his ex-girlfriend? Would you sit in his car? Ask yourself. His story had other problems too. For example, it's weird to me that Jay only came forward when his body was found. He had 6 weeks before that when he didn't. The body was found and suddenly he voluntarily calls the police and rats himself and Adnan out. A little weird to me because if, let's say, Jay is lying and framing Adnan, he could not have framed Adnan without knowing details like where the body was buried, how deep the hole in the ground was, etc. Obviously though, he might have just been scared. Finding the body made his chance of getting caught much higher, and so maybe he thought that this was one way of getting out of this, by confessing first. The police asked Jay, "Why didn't you tell us sooner? You had hours on that day when Adnan wasn't with you. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Jay says what you would expect him to. He had a criminal history. He was a marijuana dealer while still in school. Adnan was a respected and high-achieving student. He thought the police would catch him before they would do anything to Adnan. This is also Jay's theory about why Adnan asked for his help in burying Jay's body. He couldn't have possibly asked his friends from his local mosque or his magnet school friends from his high school. He had to ask someone with a more jagged background, someone who would be less likely to report him, Jay said. All of this makes sense to me, honestly. His story adds up. But then there are the discrepancies, his changing versions of the story. But one piece of Jay's story that Adnan never challenged was the part where Jay and Adnan hung out on that day when he disappeared. Adnan says, yes, we hung out in the middle of school hours. Yes, he had my car and my phone. Yes, he dropped me off back at school. But we weren't hanging out for the sake of hiding a body or discussing a murder. Adnan says they hung out because it was Jay's girlfriend, Stephanie's birthday, and Adnan had given her a stuffed toy as a gift. He had asked Jay if Jay had given her anything, but Jay said he hadn't. So Adnan offered to help him. That's why Adnan went over to Jay's house, picked him up and went to Westview Mall so that Jay could get her a gift at around 10:45 a.m. If you remember, it was in the parking lot of this mall that Jay says that Adnan told him he was going to kill her. Adnan agrees to being at the mall, but disagrees that this conversation ever happened. He said they just bought Stephanie's gift. Then Jay dropped Adnan off at school, to which Adnan agrees. After this, Adnan says he was in school the entire time, but Jay says he met Adnan on that abandoned road to bury his body after school ended and before track practice started at around 3:40, and then dropped him off at track practice at 4. Adnan says Jay came and picked him up after track practice, not before, and then the two went to a friend, Kathy's house. Then Adnan says he probably went to the mosque and brought his father food because it was Ramadan. Unfortunately for Adnan, Jay says that at the time when Adnan claims to be at the mosque or bringing his dad food, Adnan was with him, hiding his car and burying the shovels they used to bury her body. Also, unfortunately for Adnan, their common friend Jen claims to have seen the two of them together at the time that Adnan claims to be at the mosque. Jen's testimony is very important to me because she is the one person who saw the two men together at the time when Adnan claims not to be with Jay at all. Jen says she got a call from Jay at around 8 p.m. and Jay asked her to come get him from the parking of the Westview Mall. Jen gets to the mall and sees Jay and Adnan together. Adnan looks normal, says hi to Jen. Jay looks shook up. He gets into Jen's car and tells her about the murder and the body. The two start driving away, but Jay suddenly remembers the shovels he had just disposed of with Adnan. Those shovels were Jay's, and they might have his fingerprints on it. So Jay makes Jen go all the way back to the mall parking lot where Jay retrieves the shovels and wipes them clean so no fingerprints remain. Jay then gets back into Jen's car and he's disturbed. He asks Jen to take him to his girlfriend's house immediately. The next day, it was Jen again who helped drive Jay to a different dumpster where she watched him throw his clothes and shoes from the previous day. Now, this is pretty damning evidence against Adnan, isn't it? The only problem with it is that Jay never mentioned calling Jen, or Jen coming over to pick him up from the parking lot, or Jen taking him to his girlfriend's house. He says it was Adnan that dropped him off back home after they dumped the shovels in the mall parking lot. Why lie about this detail? The detail about who dropped him home? I don't for the life of me understand the discrepancies in Jay's stories. If he can lie about this and so many other small details, what else can he lie about? And Jen claims she never actually saw the shovels Jay was wiping right in front of her car. She says all she saw was Jay walk up to the dumpster, dig in for something, and then come back a while later. Regardless of Jay's shaky credibility though, Jen's testimony is hard for me to make sense of. Sure, Jay could be lying. Sure, the police could have molded this case to be biased against Adnan 6 weeks after he disappeared, after that first anonymous call, which a lot of people believe, by the way. But Jen claims to have seen all of this happen the day he disappeared. This is not a story from 6 weeks later. Jen's story didn't waver or change like Jay's story does. Her phone records prove her account. And I read this on a Reddit page once and it made a lot of sense to me. The post said that if the state did fabricate the case against Adnan, why did Jay's story change so much? The biased officers could have just handed Jay and Jen the same set of facts to rat off. The fact that Jay's story differs from time to time, but Jen's version corroborates the big main points of Jay's story, is very meaningful to me. But yet again, we come back to the 21 minutes. Sure, Jen supports Jay's story from 8 p.m. and onwards, but the murder occurred between 2:15 and 2:36 p.m., the time between when Hay was last seen and when Adnan called Jay to see Hay's body and help bury it. The main difference in the two stories of Adnan and Jay, if you notice, is the time between school ending and track practice, 2:15 and 4 p.m. If only Adnan had an alibi for this time, right? Turns out, Adnan did have an alibi willing to come forward and tell the world that Adnan was with her during the time of the murder, but Adnan's lawyer ignored her. This alibi is Adnan's high school friend named Asia McLean. When Adnan had been arrested by the police on the 28th of February, Asia started thinking about the last time she saw Hay and Adnan. It's something so normal to do, to wonder how these people were, how they behaved when you last met them, shortly before their lives turned upside down. As she started thinking about the last time she saw Adnan, she realized she actually saw him the day he disappeared, on the 13th of January in the school library. Not only did she see him, she spoke to him for a while about him and Hay. She remembers this was the day she spoke to him, not some other day, because she remembers school closing for 2 days after due to the crazy snowstorm. Quote, I told him I had heard him and Hay broke up. He told me that it was true. He told me that she had started a relationship with a new guy. He referred to him as a white dude, is what he said. I kind of felt bad for prying. He just kind of shrugged it off and he said, I just want her to be happy, Asia says in the HBO documentary titled The Case Against Adnan. Asia says the memory of this conversation with Adnan slowly creeped on her until it was like a light bulb moment. I realized I might have been the last person to see this guy, and we talked about her.
I asked him about his breakup with Hay. She was dating someone else, but that he just wanted her to be happy. He didn't seem to be disturbed or angry with her.
Once Asia realized this, she even went over to Adnan's family home to meet with his parents and tell them that she might know something that might be helpful. The family house was packed with people and relatives, all distraught over Adnan's arrest. She was able to speak to a few of Adnan's relatives, but none of them saw any importance in her alibi because to them, it only seemed like a 15 to 20 minute window. What good would that do, right? But Adnan's case will eventually come to rest on this 15 to 20 minute window. Asia didn't stop at just meeting Adnan's family though, she even wrote him a letter. March 1st, 1999. I just came from your house an hour ago. Dear Adnan, I hope I spelled that right. I know that you can't have visitors, so I've decided to write you a letter. I'm not sure if you remember talking to me in the library on Jan 13th, but I remember talking to you. Throughout your actions that day, I have reason to believe in your innocence. I called the Woodlawn Public Library and found that they have a surveillance system inside the building. Depending on the amount of time you spent in the library that afternoon, it might help your defense. I'm trying to reach your lawyer to schedule a possible meeting with the three of us. We aren't close friends, but I want you to look into my eyes and tell me of your innocence. If I ever find out otherwise, I will hunt you down and whip your ass. Okay, friend. Smiley face. End quote. Asia was right. The library did have a surveillance system which would have placed Adnan at the library after school and between when he was supposed to get her cousin, if indeed he was there. And Asia did reach out to Adnan's lawyer, Christina Gutierrez, with the information that she had. But there was a reason Adnan's family fired Gutierrez once the trial was over. And one of the biggest reasons she was fired was because of the way she handled Adnan's one and only alibi, Asia. This was what Adnan says about the situation. Quote, it's the letter I received from Asia McLean, probably within a few days after I was arrested. I immediately notified Gutierrez. It would have been the next time that I saw her on a visit. I showed her the two letters and read them, and I asked her, could she please do two things? Contact Asia McLean and try to go to the library to retrieve whatever security footage was there. Subsequent to the time when I mentioned this to Miss Gutierrez, the next visit, I immediately asked her, did you speak to Asia McLean? What did she have to say? Were you able to secure the surveillance cameras? Her response was, I looked into it and nothing came of it. Now, just like everything else in this case, even this tiny detail about Adnan giving his lawyer the Asia letters has way too much information for me to dig into in one episode. There are hundreds of Reddit pages on just this detail alone. For example, Adnan claims to have given Gutierrez the letters a day or two after he got them. But Gutierrez wasn't even Adnan's lawyer for the first week after he got the letters. Many also claim that while Asia remembers being at the library that day, Adnan never remembered it himself. To use Asia as his alibi in trial makes Adnan look like a liar, someone using Asia's memory of the wrong day for his own benefit. Also, by the time these letters reached Gutierrez, the CCTV surveillance tapes were destroyed. This was routine for old surveillance camera technology, where there wasn't enough storage to keep thousands of hours worth of footage, and so new footage taped over the old one, effectively destroying the old one. Lastly, Gutierrez came forward to claim that Asia simply remembered the wrong day when she spoke to Adnan, a claim that Asia ardently disagrees with. Like I said though, Asia wasn't the only reason that many claim Gutierrez wasn't a good lawyer to Adnan, completely negating the fact that she was eventually disbarred for taking on about 20 clients who made payments to her worth $200,000 for work she never ended up completing. She also failed to counter evidence presented against Adnan at trial. One of the biggest pieces of such evidence was the cell tower data and the call logs from Adnan's phone that we've been discussing since the beginning of this episode. It was this cell tower data and the call log from AT&T that showed us all the calls that Jay said Adnan made to him that day on his own phone, because remember, Jay had Adnan's phone, and it was the cell tower data that placed Adnan next to Leakin Park the day of Hayes' disappearance. Let's first start with the call log. The biggest, most important call that Jay claims Adnan made to him on Adnan's own phone was the call after Adnan had killed Hay. In one story, Jay says that Adnan called him to an abandoned road where he showed him Hay's body. But at trial, Jay claims Adnan actually killed Hay in a Best Buy parking lot and called him from a Best Buy phone booth to come get him. Since this was Jay's final version, let us focus on this one. It was this call received on Adnan's phone at 2:36 p.m. when the phone was with Jay that creates the 21-minute window between when Hay was last seen and when Jay claims Hay was killed. Jay claims he had Adnan's phone, to which Adnan agrees. He says he got a call at 2:36 on Adnan's phone. He picks up and Adnan is on the other line. Adnan asks Jay to come get him from the Best Buy parking lot. Jay drives over and sees Adnan standing next to a payphone right outside Best Buy, wearing red gloves. This entire time, Adnan claims he was at school talking to Asia McLean in the library and getting ready for track practice. This call made to Jay from the payphone, as Cristina Gutierrez claims, was the pillar of the state's case against Adnan. Now be sure, this call actually does exist on Adnan's phone. It's a 5-second long incoming call. Unfortunately, back in the day, there was no name attached to incoming calls, so we have no idea where this call came from. We just know there is a call. Now, the host of the podcast Serial, Sarah Koenig, did a little digging back in 2014 and went on a hunt for this payphone that Jay claims Adnan called him from. As of 2014, there was no payphone there outside the Best Buy, so they dug a little deeper. They found Best Buy employees who had worked at the store in 1999, and none of them, not a single employee, remembers a payphone. A little weird, but it still might be explained, right? So they find photos of the Best Buy parking from 2001. No payphone. They find blueprints for the store from the year that the store was set up. No payphone. They look for records of an agreement between Best Buy and any payphone service company, but again, no payphone.
Ash, then how did the state hinge their argument on this payphone if the payphone doesn't exist?
Because nobody verified this back when the case actually took place. This is being verified by Serial in 2014,
No.
right?
So what did the state actually have?
They had this call that was coming into Adnan's phone while Adnan's phone was with Jay.
And were they able to trace it back to a payphone, not a specific payphone?
No, there's no such proof.
It was a number.
It was a number.
But
That
I'm
came
guessing
exactly when Jay said that he got that call.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Right. The host of the podcast checked with service providers like Verizon, and again, no payphone. The main call that Jay claims Adnan made to him, the only call made within the infamous 21-minute window, came from a payphone that may have never existed to begin with. Had the cops checked this back in 1999, they would have been a step closer to the truth, but they didn't. Had Cristina Gutierrez questioned the state on their use of this payphone call as evidence against Adnan, we'd all be a little closer to the truth, but she didn't. Adnan says he never made this call to Jay, but he also has no idea who did. There are a lot of other calls made from Jay to other people and made to Adnan's phone that don't match Jay's story. For example, Jay claims to have called a friend after him and Adnan dropped his car off at a random location, but that call was made much earlier than Jay claims it was. There's something else that's off about Jay's story too. He claims he picked Adnan up from Best Buy after Adnan called him from the payphone. The two ditch his car at a random location, and then the two drive over to Patapsco State Park to smoke a blunt. But when Serial's host Sarah Koenig tried to recreate the route in her own car, there was absolutely no way they could have driven all the way to the park and come back for Adnan to be at track practice in time. And Jay agrees he did drop Adnan off at track practice in time. The park was simply too far away for this to have been humanly possible, and it seemed useless for them to go all the way there just for a joint when Adnan really needed to be at track practice for an alibi if he indeed did kill Hay. They could have smoked up anywhere. Sarah Koenig also recreates the entire 21-minute route that Jay and the police claim Adnan took to kill Hay after Adnan challenged Sarah Koenig that it was simply impossible. Koenig waited outside Woodlawn High School and waited for the 2:15 bell. About 1,500 students leave once the bell rings, so it takes her time to get her car. Even once she gets to her car, she can't leave until all the buses leave, so she waits for the buses to leave. Then Hay had stopped for a snack, and so Koenig stopped for a snack too. Then she drove her car to Best Buy, where Jay says Adnan killed Hay. Manual strangulation takes some time, and so Koenig waits in her car for a couple of minutes. Then she waits a few minutes for the time that Adnan would have spent putting Hay's body in the trunk on an afternoon in an open parking lot. Then she walks to the location of the supposed payphone and makes the call to Jay. Koenig managed to recreate all of this in a little over 22 minutes, only giving Adnan 1.5 minutes to actually kill Hay. So as Koenig puts it is possible, but it's highly unlikely. When Koenig told Adnan she succeeded in recreating the route in about the same time, Adnan said, quote, "If you guys said you did it, then you did it. But I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say." End quote. There are literally countless such small details you need to make sense of in this case. So if you want more details into calls, the route, the locations, go over to the podcast Serial and listen to the 12 episodes to make sense of these tiny details. But now that you understand the story behind the 21 minutes, let's move away from the cell phone records and come to the cell tower data. How cell tower data works is that every time you make or receive a call, your cell phone makes a connection with a nearby cell tower. So when you ask for this cell phone tower data for a specific phone number, you get a record of all of the towers that this phone connected with every time this phone got or made a call. And then the location of the towers gives you the location of the phone. So for Adnan's case, it was this cell phone tower data that showed that Adnan's location was Leakin Park the day of Hay's disappearance, because two calls made to Adnan's phone, one at 7:09 p.m. and one at 7:16 p.m. both pinged the tower at Leakin Park, the same park where his body was found 6 weeks later. The state brought a cell tower expert to court to read the records. Not only did the prosecutors use the records to say that Adnan killed Hay because he was at Leakin Park, but they also used it to discredit the testimony of Asia McLean later. They said even if Asia would have come forward at trial, her claims wouldn't have discredited the cell tower records. After all, why else would Adnan be at Leakin Park the day Hay disappeared if not to kill and bury her? But here's what Adnan's lawyer, Christina Gutierrez, failed to notice. When AT&T sent across the cell phone records, written in a small disclaimer at the top of the page was this statement, quote, "Only outgoing calls are reliable for location status. Any incoming calls will not be considered reliable information for location," end quote.
Why is that?
I'm honestly not sure, Aryan, why this happens.
Ash, I think it has something to do with the fact that when it's an incoming call, it could be from anywhere. It's the tower.
Sure, the tower.
It's the proximity to the closest tower when you're making the call that matters.
Right, not when
with
you receive
incoming,
the call.
I think it's like being read out. I don't know, guys. I'm talking out of my ass.
Yeah, I have no idea.
But yeah, this just completely, I think, not absolves, but
it's such a
changes the
huge
game.
detail.
Yeah.
It would have been huge at trial. But yeah. Everyone, including the cell tower expert, conveniently either ignored or missed this critical piece of information, especially considering that both calls that placed Adnan at Leakin Park were incoming calls. This problem is best demonstrated by the Nisha call, the call that I mentioned a while ago. If you remember, this is the only call where the person that picked up claims to have talked to both Jay and Adnan, meaning they were together. But unlike all of the other calls, it's the only call made to a friend of Adnan's, not a friend of Jay's. That is why this call is important. If Jay was faking all of this, Adnan's friend who has no connection to Jay would have never claimed they were both together if they actually were not. This call is also important because it shows that Jay and Adnan were together at a time when Adnan claims he was at school talking to Asia McLean or getting ready for track practice. Jay claims this call was made from outside a golf course, but the tower that this call pinged was minutes away at the Best Buy. And as pointed out by Sarah Koenig in Serial, this is true for all calls made in this afternoon period that day. None of their cell tower location matches where Jay says these calls were made from. So if the state can believe Jay's story about these calls being made from one location but the tower telling a different story, why can't they believe the same thing when Adnan says he wasn't at Leakin Park when those calls came in? The trial completely ignored this question and Gutierrez failed to point it out properly. Now, time and time again in this episode, I have brought up Hayes' car. After all, if the police didn't know where Hayes' car was, but Adnan and Jay knew, and Jay took the police to Hayes' car, it would conclusively prove that Jay was somehow involved in the murder and hiding of Hayes' body and car. It would make Jay's case against Adnan much stronger. And in fact, that is exactly what happened. The police asked Jay to take them to the car, and Jay did. He took them to a park and ride, which is basically a parking lot outside big cities where people can leave their cars and travel to the inside of the city via metros. In this park and ride, the police found his car. This is where Jay had always claimed Adnan had left the car the day that he killed Hay. Back then, this seemed like, and even now might seem like to a lot of you listeners, as a gotcha moment against Adnan. How can he not be guilty, you might think. But this is yet another piece of information in this case that shows you how deep investigations need to be and how much detail must go into solving these crimes. The HBO documentary titled The Case Against Adnan features a private investigator named Luke Brindle Kim looking at the photos of the car parked in the park and ride. These were the photos the police clicked back in 1999 when they found the car with Jay's help. The documentary came out in 2019, so 20 years later. The private investigator Kim notices something interesting about the car. The grass under the car was fresh green. This was winter Baltimore that had experienced a snowstorm that had shut schools down. This was a 6-week-long period that Jay claimed the car had been there in those winter conditions, with the car blocking all sunlight to the grass below. But the grass was still green. In fact, you look at the pictures closely, the car next to Hayes has grass under it, but that grass is a lot less greener than the grass under Hayes' car. Weird. This detail made me tick. In fact, private investigator Kim drives all the way to the same parking lot and knocks at a house right across from it. A lady opens the door, a lady who's been living in the same house since the 1970s, long before Adnan was even born. So this lady was there in the same house across from this parking lot when this car was ditched there, either by Adnan or by someone else. Investigator Kim shows her a picture of the car and asks her, "Do you remember seeing this car? It apparently stood here for 6 weeks. Quote, "It would not have sat 6 to 8 weeks without any of us finding out why it was still there. We would have called 311 and told them about a car, that it belongs to none of the neighbors around. They would have come out, checked the car, tagged the car and towed it away. That's why I say, 6 weeks? No." End quote. If you think this detail is as weird as I think it is, what you're basically believing by extension is that Hayes' car wasn't moved by Adnan the day Jay says it was moved there. It was moved much later. It was moved very close to the time that Jay took the police to the car. Added to all of this evidence I've presented to you in this case is the fact that no DNA evidence ever linked Adnan to Hayes' body or to Leakin Park. The police went over Adnan's car, the trunk of which had Hayes' body in it, according to Jay. They went through all of Adnan's shoes for soil samples, all of his clothes, his entire room, but nothing. No hair samples, no fingerprints, no soil samples, no clothing fibers. Nothing matched Adnan. But also, nothing matched Jay either. The only weird detail was that Jay claims he saw Adnan wearing red gloves at the payphone in the Best Buy parking lot, and a singular red cloth fiber was found on Hayes' body. Those gloves were never found. Big detail or small detail, you decide. Any evidence the police found, such as a fingerprint on Hayes' rearview mirror that did not match Jay or Adnan, the police didn't even test on anyone else. They just simply let it go. And in that process, they might have let go of the person that actually killed Hay. When the podcast Serial first came out in 2014, its analysis of the cell tower data and its review of the Asia McLean testimony brought this case to the forefront again. The world saw that even though Serial didn't prove Adnan to be innocent, it proved that Adnan got a bad trial and a faulty investigation. Because of Serial, Adnan got to appeal his case at a hearing where Asia McLean was allowed to speak too. This was 2016. Months after this hearing, Adnan is granted a new trial because of a poorly conducted investigation and a poor job by his lawyer, who, by the way, died a very unfortunate death in 2004. Cristina Gutierrez didn't even remember her own son's name when she passed away. Adnan ends up waiting 2 years for this new trial to begin, during which he wasn't allowed to leave prison on bail. 2 years after the new trial was granted, in 2019, the Maryland Court of Appeals voted 4-3 to reverse the decision for a new trial, saying, quote, "There is not a significant or substantial possibility that the verdict would have been different," end quote. A few months after the denial, Adnan's lawyer appealed his case again in the Supreme Court, asking for a new trial again. The Supreme Court too rejects the demand for a new trial in 2019. Then, in September 2020, a major new development took place for Adnan. The prosecutors who had tried him claimed they had lost faith in Adnan's conviction in light of new evidence and violations in the turning over of evidence. The Baltimore City Circuit Court basically set Adnan free. Adnan went on to accept a full-time job at Georgetown University's Prisons and Justice Initiative. Adnan got a taste of freedom. But then on the 28th of March 2023, Adnan's conviction was reinstated. He was a guilty man in the eyes of the law, yet again. He was 41 at the time, having spent more than half his life, 23 years in prison behind bars, for a murder he claims he did not commit. But then, on the 25th of February 2025, Adnan's life changed forever again. But this time, the change is here to stay. Just weeks ago, the Baltimore State Attorney Ivan Bates came out with a statement saying his office has taken back their previous motion against Adnan. The judge in this case, Judge Jennifer Schleifer, finally ruled on the matter, changing Adnan's sentence to time served, meaning the days that he has already spent in prison are his sentence, which he has now fully served. This sentence also means that Adnan can no longer be tried for the crime and no decision can now be appealed, making Adnan a truly free man for the first time in 25 years. Today, Adnan is 43 years old. If you ask me, I am not unabashedly sure of Adnan's innocence, not from my research at least, but I am equally unsure of his guilt. I started this episode by asking you to first make an individual judgment, but then also think like a jury. Are there big, reasonable, and significant details in this case that make you go, he might actually be innocent? If there are, and I think there are, Adnan deserves to be free. But more importantly, let's remember the person for whom all of this is happening. Heightened Lee, the 18-year-old, who also would have been a 43-year-old today. Maybe she too would have been someone's wife, someone's mom. We may disagree on what we hope happens to Adnan, but we can all agree on one thing. We hope whoever took his life on that fateful day in 1999 is brought to justice. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.